10th of December 1941, the South China Sea, east of Kuantan on the Malay Peninsula. The Royal Navy's newest battleship, HMS Prince of Wales, and the veteran battlecruiser HMS Repulse are about to face their ultimate test. The two capital ships run south through a clear blue morning with no air cover above them. Their crews stand at battle stations as a single reconnaissance plane circles at the edge of visual range. Behind it, 85 Japanese bombers are inbound from Saigon. Force Z's destruction over the next 2 hours will become a brutal demonstration of the changing face of naval warfare. A duel between two veteran capital ships and swarms of land-based bombers, ending in one of the most consequential sinkings of the Second World War. In the summer of 1941, Winston Churchill insisted on sending a small but powerful naval force to Singapore. The reasoning was political rather than military. A modern British battleship in Far Eastern waters, he argued, would deter Japan from any move south. The First Sea Lord, Admiral of the Fleet Sir Dudley Pound, opposed the plan. So did the Commander-in-Chief Home Fleet, Admiral Sir John Tovey, who argued that the King George V class had been designed for the cold waters of the North Atlantic and were unsuited to tropical service. Churchill overruled them both. The force was originally called Force G. It included Prince of Wales, Repulse, and the 4 destroyers HMS Electra, Express, Encounter, and Jupiter. When it arrived at the Sembawang Naval Base on the north shore of Singapore Island at noon on December 2, 1941, it was redesignated Force Z. Encounter and Jupiter had defects and could not sail again at short notice. They were replaced by the First World War veteran HMS Tenedos and HMAS Vampire of the Royal Australian Navy. There was supposed to be a 5th ship in the formation. HMS Indomitable, a brand new fleet carrier, was to provide air cover. But on the 3rd of November 1941, while entering Kingston Harbour in Jamaica, Indomitable struck a pinnacle rock off the marked channel. By the time she was ready, Force Z had already sailed without her. 6 days after Prince of Wales tied up at Sembawang, the Pacific War began. Prince of Wales was the second of the King George V class. She had been built at Camel Laird in Birkenhead, laid down on January 1, 1937, launched on May 3, 1939, and completed on March 31, 1941. She displaced about 43,000 tons at full load, measured 745 feet overall, and could make 28 knots. Her main armament was 10 14-inch guns in 2 quadruple turrets and 1 twin turret. Her secondary battery was 16 5.25-inch dual-purpose guns. Her close-in anti-aircraft defense was the famous British 8-barrel 2-pounder pom-pom, of which she carried 4. She was, on paper, one of the most modern and best protected battleships in the world. She had also already been in combat. Only weeks after commissioning, and still with civilian engineers aboard fixing teething problems in her main turrets, she had sailed with HMS Hood against the German battleship Bismarck in the Denmark Strait. When Hood blew up, Prince of Wales had continued the engagement alone, scored 3 hits on Bismarck before her own bridge was wrecked by a 38-centimeter shell, leaving 13 dead before disengaging due to poor visibility. In August, she had carried Churchill across the Atlantic to Placentia Bay, Newfoundland, for the Atlantic Charter meeting with Roosevelt. Her captain was John Catterall Leach, a Somerset man, Jutland veteran, and her only commanding officer since commissioning. Repulse was a different proposition. She was a Renown-class battlecruiser, built at John Brown on the Clyde, and completed in August 1916, in time for the last years of the First World War. She had been modernized twice between the wars, most thoroughly between 1933 and 1936, and she emerged from those refits as a fast, capable ship, displacing about 36,800 tons at full load, measuring 794 feet overall, and capable of 31.5 knots. Her main battery was 6 15-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, the same caliber that had served the Royal Navy since the First World War. She had escorted convoys from the Atlantic to the Cape and back, hunted the Bismarck, and steamed more than 30,000 miles since September 1939 without losing a ship under her protection. Her captain was William George Tennant, who had run the evacuation at Dunkirk as senior naval officer ashore. He had commanded Repulse since June 1940. She was, by every account, a happy ship. The man flying his flag in Prince of Wales was Admiral Sir Tom Spencer Vaughan Phillips. He was 53 years old, only 5 feet 4 inches tall, and known throughout the Royal Navy as Tom Thumb. He had spent most of his career in staff appointments. He had served as Deputy and then Vice Chief of the Naval Staff in London from June 1939 to October 1941, a close confidant of Churchill, and a planner rather than a seagoing commander. He was promoted to acting Full Admiral and appointed Commander-in-Chief Eastern Fleet on December 1st, 1941, only days before war broke out. He had never commanded a fleet at sea in action. He had little experience of carrier operations and was widely regarded by airmen and by his fellow admirals as a man who underestimated the threat of aircraft to surface ships. In the early hours of December 8th, 1941, the Pacific War began on 3 fronts almost at once. Japanese troops of Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita's 25th Army landed at Kota Baru on the northeastern coast of Malaya, and simultaneously at Singora and Patani in southern Thailand. About 2 hours later, 17 Mitsubishi G-3M bombers of the Mihoro Air Group bombed Singapore in the city's first air raid. By breakfast, the news of Pearl Harbor was arriving from Hawaii. Phillips faced a decision. With the American battle line crippled at Pearl Harbor, his 2 capital ships were now the most powerful Allied surface units in the entire Pacific. They were also, by his own admission, insufficient to fight the Japanese fleet. But he could not simply remain at anchor in Singapore while Japanese troops poured ashore in northern Malaya. He resolved to sortie north and attack the Japanese landings at Singora on the morning of December 10th. This required air cover. The Royal Air Force in the Far East was under the command of Air Vice Marshal Conway Pulford. His fighter strength consisted of obsolescent Brewster Buffaloes flown by Australian and New Zealand squadrons. Number 453 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force was designated Fleet Defence Squadron, and its acting commander, Flight Lieutenant Tim Viggers, proposed in his own words to keep 6 aircraft over Force Z all daylight hours within 60 miles of the east coast to a point north of Kota Baru. Phillips refused. He wanted to preserve radio silence and feared revealing his position. He did request fighter cover over Singora for the morning of his planned strike. On the night of December 8th, he was informed that no cover could be provided there. He concluded that he could expect no air cover at all. Force Z slipped from Zembawang at 25 minutes to 6 in the evening on the 8th of December. Phillips signalled his ships as they left harbour. "We are out looking for trouble, and no doubt we shall find it. We hope to surprise the enemy transports tomorrow, and we expect to meet the Japanese battleship Congo." For the first day, they ran north into deteriorating weather, which Phillips welcomed as cover. Just after 2 in the afternoon on December 9th, the Japanese submarine I-65 sighted the British ships near Perlo Condore Island and broadcast a contact report. The transmission was received with poor reception. It took the better part of 90 minutes to decode and reach Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, the commander of the Japanese fleet covering the landings. Late in the afternoon, 2 Aichi reconnaissance floatplanes from the heavy cruisers Suzuya and Kumano sighted Force Z directly. One of them is reported to have mistakenly dropped a flare over its own flagship, and the British saw the flare and assumed they had been spotted. Just before 9 in the evening, Phillips made his decision. He signalled the force that he was cancelling the operation. Having been located, surprise was lost. The Japanese transports would be gone by morning. He turned south for Singapore. Then, just before midnight, came a signal from his Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Palliser, at Singapore. A Japanese landing had been reported at Kuantan, halfway down the Malay coast between Kota Baru and Singapore. The report turned out to be entirely false, but Phillips, almost on his return route, decided to investigate. And here he made the fatal decision. He did not signal Palliser to tell him he was diverting. He continued to maintain radio silence. As a result, no one in Singapore knew Force Z was heading for Kuantan, and no fighter cover was sent to meet him there. In the dark hours of December 10th, the Japanese submarine I-58 sighted Force Z and attempted a 6-torpedo salvo on Repulse. 1 tube jammed, 5 torpedoes ran, all missed. The submarine then trailed the British ships for 3 hours, broadcasting their position. By dawn, the 22nd Air Flotilla at Saigon was launching its strike. 85 bombers in 3 groups, 51 carrying Type 91 aerial torpedoes, 34 carrying high explosive and armor-piercing bombs, They headed south into a clear sky over a flat blue sea. At 10:15 in the morning, a Mitsubishi G-3M reconnaissance Nell, piloted by Ensign Masato Hashi, sighted an enemy formation and broadcast its position. He stayed at the edge of visual range, circling, and shadowed the British ships through the entire action that followed. The first attack began at 13 minutes past 11 in the morning. 8 bomb-armed G-3Ms of the Mihiro Air Group, under Lieutenant Yoshimi Shirai, approached from 10,000 feet and bombed Repulse with 250-kilogram bombs. 7 landed in the sea as near misses. 1 hit at 22 minutes past 11. It penetrated the port aircraft hangar, exploded against the armor below the Royal Marines mess deck, and started a manageable fire. Repulse held her speed at 25 knots and continued in formation. 5 of the 8 Japanese bombers were damaged by anti-aircraft fire. 2 of those eventually flew home to Saigon. About 25 minutes later, 17 torpedo-armed Genzan Group G-3Ms came in low from the port side. 9 of them, under Lieutenant Kaoru Ishihara, targeted Prince of Wales. 8 under Lieutenant Sadao Takai targeted Repulse. Tennant in Repulse combed the tracks, turning his ship into the line of the incoming torpedoes, and was missed by all of them. Prince of Wales was not so lucky. A single torpedo struck her on the port quarter, near where the outer port propeller shaft exited the hull. That one hit, by any rational pre-war assessment, should not have been catastrophic. Prince of Wales had been designed to absorb multiple torpedo strikes, but the shaft was still turning at 204 revolutions per minute, and the explosion sheared off the outer port propeller strut at the hull, drove the shaft out of alignment, and ruptured the watertight glands where it passed through the hull. The entire length of the shaft passage opened as a flooding path. About 2,400 tons of water flooded into B engine room, the after machinery rooms, the port diesel dynamo room, and Y boiler room. Within minutes, the battleship had an 11-degree list to port, had lost electrical power to the aft 5.25-inch turrets and most of the pom-poms, had lost internal communications, and had lost steering. Best speed dropped to 15 knots. The most modern battleship in the Royal Navy was effectively crippled by a single torpedo in a single minute before she had fired a serious salvo in her own defense. Captain Tennant in Repulse, watching the flagship slow and begin to list, made the decision Phillips would not. At 2 minutes to noon, he broke radio silence with a signal that the Royal Navy would not forget. Any British man of war, his message read, enemy aircraft bombing. The signal reached Singapore 6 minutes later, at 4 minutes past noon. 10 Brewster Buffaloes of number 453 were scrambled at once. The flight time to Force Z's position was just over an hour. It would not be enough. At 20 past noon came the attack that finished both ships. 26 Mitsubishi G-4M Bettys of the Kanoya Air Group, under Lieutenant Commander Shichizo Miyauchi, arrived overhead, with another 8 torpedo-armed Mihoro Nells. 6 of the Kanoya Bettys dove in close on Prince of Wales, releasing torpedoes at ranges as short as 500 meters, and scored 3 more hits on her starboard side. The remaining bombers went after Repulse in a classic hammer and anvil attack, coming in simultaneously from both sides of the ship, so that no matter which way she turned, she would be presenting her beam to one set of torpedoes. Tennant had already dodged 19 torpedoes that morning. He could not dodge this. Repulse took a torpedo hit on the port side, then within minutes, at least 3 more, possibly 5 in total. The end came quickly. At 25 minutes past noon, Tennant gave the order to abandon ship. At 33 minutes past noon, Repulse rolled heavily to port, hung at an angle of 70 degrees for nearly a minute and a half as her crew slid into the sea, and then capsized and sank stern first. Prince of Wales was a slower death. At 20 minutes to 1, a final group of high-level Mihoro Nells dropped 500-kilogram bombs on the listing battleship. One detonated against the armoured deck amidships in the area of the cinema flat, where the wounded had been gathered. The armour held, but the blast destroyed the watertight integrity of the surrounding plating and killed many of the wounded outright. At 10 minutes past 1, Captain Leach gave the order to abandon ship. HMS Express came alongside Prince of Wales's starboard quarter to take off the wounded and the non-fighting crew. At 18 minutes past 1, the 10 Buffaloes of 453 Squadron arrived overhead. They saw a battleship dying. 2 minutes later, At 20 minutes past 1, Prince of Wales rolled over to port, floated upside down for a moment, and sank stern first. The Australian pilots circled the oil and the wreckage and the men in the water. They tried to engage Hwashi's reconnaissance, Nell still circling at the edge of visual range, but he climbed away into cloud. The Buffaloes had nothing left to do. They returned to base. The three destroyers, Electra, Express, and Vampire, spent the next several hours pulling survivors from the oil-streaked water. The Japanese, observing the rescue from above, did not interfere with it. Express recovered the bulk of the Prince of Wales survivors. Vampire alone rescued 42 of Repulse's 69 officers, including Captain Tennant himself and 754 others. Electra brought in roughly another 571. The destroyers, dangerously top-heavy with survivors, set course back to Singapore. They arrived just before midnight on December 10th. 2 men did not come home. Admiral Sir Tom Phillips was last seen on the bridge of Prince of Wales, telling his coxswain to get down and out of it before she rolled. He went down with the ship. Captain John Leach was seen briefly in the water after she sank. Lieutenant Graham, swimming for Express, recognized Leach's body floating among the wreckage. The official British casualty figure for the day is 840 dead, 327 from Prince of Wales, 513 from Repulse. Approximately 2,081 men were rescued. Japanese losses were 3 bombers shot down in combat, 1 more written off on landing, and 18 aircrew killed. When Captain Tennant came ashore at Singapore that night, soaked in oil and exhausted, he was met on the dockside by Air Vice Marshal Pulford. "My God," Pulford said to him, "I hope you don't blame me for this. I had no idea where you were." The next day, December 11th, Lieutenant Haruki Iki of the Kanoya Air Group, one of the pilots who had torpedoed Repulse, flew alone from Saigon back to the scene of the action. He dropped 2 wreaths into the South China Sea, one for the Japanese airmen lost in the attack, one for the British sailors of Prince of Wales and Repulse. Churchill was woken in the early hours of the 11th of December by First Sea Lord Pound, who telephoned him with the news. Churchill later wrote that in all the war, he had never received a more direct shock. As he lay in bed, turning the news over in his mind, he understood what it meant. There were no British or American capital ships left between Hawaii and the Cape of Good Hope. Japan was now supreme across the entire Western Pacific and Indian Oceans, and the British position east of Suez was bare. The fall of Singapore on the 15th of February 1942 followed almost as a matter of course. Yamashita's troops drove south down the Malay Peninsula in 70 days. They crossed the Johor Strait, entered Singapore Island, and took the surrender of Lieutenant General Arthur Percival's 85,000-strong garrison. About 80,000 went into Japanese captivity. It was the largest single surrender in British military history. The wider lesson was unmissable. Prince of Wales and Repulse were the first capital ships defending themselves at sea to be sunk by air attack alone. The ships destroyed at Pearl Harbor 3 days earlier had been at anchor. These 2 had been underway, fully alerted, maneuvering, and firing back. They had still been overwhelmed by 85 land-based bombers operating from airfields 400 miles away. After December 10th, 1941, no surface fleet would willingly operate within range of unopposed land-based or carrier naval air power again. Force Z had been sent east as a deterrent, ordered to sea without air cover, and destroyed in 2 hours of clear weather by an air force that the men who sent them had refused to take seriously. It was, in the end, a particular kind of British error. The belief that prestige is the same thing as power, enough to make an enemy back down. The Japanese, on the 10th of December 1941, demonstrated very precisely that it is not.